On the day of my wife and daughter's funeral, I kept looking around the funeral home, hoping my parents would walk in. But the seats reserved for them remained empty. A few hours later, as I stood by their graves, my phone buzzed. A notification. My parents were smiling by a pool in Hawaii, raising glasses of champagne, vacationing with my younger brother's family. In that moment, something inside me shattered. If my pain meant nothing to them, then from now on, my loyalty to them would mean nothing either. My name is Herman Collins, 34 years old, a long-haul truck driver living in Tulsa, Oklahoma. My life, if I were to tell it, probably wouldn't seem remarkable, at least not before everything fell apart. I'm not the kind of person who dreams big or chases fame or fortune. I just wanted a home, a place to return to after long hauls where I could see Kayla, my wife, smiling and hear the bright laughter of Lori, our 7-year-old daughter. For me, that was enough. Truly. Kayla, 33, was the strongest woman I've ever known. She was capable, sharp, and always knew how to make me laugh, even when I was exhausted from days on the road. She ran an online store selling handmade crafts. From woven bracelets to small, beautiful paintings she created herself. Kayla wasn't just my wife. She was my entire sky, the person who made me believe I could be a better man, even when I sometimes felt I didn't deserve her. And Lori, our little light. She was in 2nd grade, at that carefree age, yet already so mature, polite, and caring. Her bright, sparkling eyes reminded me of Kayla. Every time I came home from a trip, Lori would run to me, hug me tightly, and chatter excitedly about the drawings she made at school or the perfect score she'd just earned. Those moments, I swear, were worth more than anything in the world. We lived in a small house, not luxurious but cozy. There was a little garden out front where Kayla grew patches of daisies, and a corner of the living room with an old armchair where I loved to sit each evening listening to Lori talk about her school day. Our life was simple, but it was filled with happiness. But to build the home I had today, I'd come a long way from my childhood. I was born and raised in Broken Arrow, not far from Tulsa. My family wasn't poor, but we weren't well off either. My father, Norman Collins, was a mechanic, and my mother, Ashley, worked at a bank. They got by with a house, a car, and enough money to raise my brother and me. My younger brother, Sean, 4 years my junior, was the pride of the family. From a young age, Sean was pampered more than I was. He was smart, quick-witted, and had a knack for charming people. And me? I was just Herman, the quiet older brother with nothing special to show for it. I didn't resent Sean. He was my brother, and I loved him. I grew used to being overlooked, to being compared. I told myself I just wasn't good enough, wasn't worthy enough. But deep down, I always hoped that one day my parents would look at me the way they looked at Sean, with genuine pride. I'm not the type to complain. I learned to stay quiet, work hard, and fend for myself. At 18, I left home and found work as a truck driver. The job was tough, the pay wasn't great, but it was steady. I met Kayla at a small roadside cafe where she was working part-time to pay for college. She smiled at me, a genuine smile, and for the first time I felt seen as a person, not someone's shadow. We fell in love, got married, and had Lori. My life, though not perfect, felt complete. I thought I'd escaped the shadow of my childhood, the feeling of being abandoned by my own family. But I was wrong. That day started like any other. I was driving my truck through Kansas on a familiar long stretch of road. Endless highways, golden cornfields under the sunlight, and the radio playing old country songs, all part of my life. I was used to being away from home, but on every trip I counted the hours until I could return to Kayla and Lori. That morning, Kayla had called me, her voice cheerful. "Honey, Lori and I are going on a school picnic today." She's so excited, insisting on bringing the doll you bought her. I smiled, picturing Lori scampering around the lake at the picnic, her ponytail bouncing, and Kayla standing nearby, watching her while gently reminding her not to run too far. I replied, "Love you both. Have fun." That was the last time I heard Kayla's voice. That afternoon, as I pulled into a rest stop, my phone buzzed. I thought it was Kayla, but the screen showed Lori's teacher, Miss Carter. I frowned, a bad feeling creeping in. "Herman, something's happened." Her voice broke, trembling so much I had to strain to hear. "Kayla and Lori, the lake. The rescue team did everything they could, but..." I don't remember what she said next. My ears rang as if the world had been sucked into a silent void. The lake? Kayla? Lori? No, it couldn't be. I shouted into the phone. "What are you saying? Where's my Lori? Where's Kayla?" But Miss Carter just sobbed, repeating, "I'm so sorry, Herman, I'm so sorry." I don't know how I drove back to Tulsa. My mind was blank, my hands gripping the steering wheel until they were white. I only remember the blurry headlights on the road, the sound of horns as I ran red lights, and my voice muttering like a broken man. No, it's not real. It can't be real. I called Miss Carter back, then the hospital, hoping someone would tell me it was all a terrible mistake. But no, everyone confirmed it. Kayla and Lori were gone. I drove like a ghost through the night. When dawn broke, I was at the hospital. A police officer on duty in the hallway looked at me, his eyes heavy. "Are you Herman Collins?" he asked. I nodded, my throat tight. "I'm sorry. We did everything we could. Your wife and daughter were brought in yesterday evening. They drowned and didn't make it." My ears buzzed. I blinked rapidly, trying to cling to his words, but my mind was empty. I heard him speaking, but it was like his voice came from a distant place. My heart pounded, aching as if it might explode. I shook my head, stammering, "No, it can't be. You've made a mistake. There has to be a mistake." I was almost begging, clutching the officer's arm as if he could change the truth by saying something else. But his eyes remained heavy, sorrowful. His silence was crueler than any words. I wanted to scream, to run away, but my feet felt like stone. I followed them, each step heavy as if I were walking into an abyss. They led me down a long hallway to the basement morgue. The metal door opened and a blast of cold air hit me, making my whole body tremble. Then, when the white sheet was pulled back, I saw Kayla and Lori lying there, their faces peaceful as if asleep. Kayla's long hair was still wet, clinging to her forehead, a silent witness to the water that had taken her life. Next to her was Lori, my tiny girl, her small hands now without a trace of warmth. I collapsed to my knees. Kayla's hand was ice cold in mine. I gently stroked Lori's hair, searching for any sign that this was just a nightmare. But no, the truth was crueler than any dream. A raw, broken cry tore from my chest, hoarse and shattered, then faded into the cold silence. My entire world crumbled before my eyes. I didn't cry, not because I was strong, but because the pain was so immense that tears couldn't even come. I just held Kayla's hand, whispering, I'm sorry I wasn't there." In my mind, I saw Kayla calling my name in the swirling water, Lori crying for her daddy. I wasn't there to protect them. I, the husband, the father, had failed. Despite the unbearable loss, I knew I had to stand up. I had to arrange the funeral to give Kayla and Lori the send-off they deserved. I called colleagues, friends, and family. Ralph and Lillian, Kayla's parents, came immediately. They hugged me, sobbing, their faces etched with the pain of losing their daughter and granddaughter. "Herman, we're here," Lillian said, her voice choked. I nodded, trying to hold myself together for them. But deep down, I only wanted one thing: for my parents to show up, to hold me, to say they understood this pain. I needed them more than ever. I gathered the courage to call my mother. "Mom, Kayla, and Lori, they're gone," I said, my voice breaking. "The funeral's on Saturday. I hope you and Dad can come." She was silent for a moment, then replied in an even tone, "I hear you, Herman. We'll try to make it." I heard laughter in the background as if she were somewhere joyful. My father added, "Stay strong, son. I hung up, stunned for a moment. Try to make it? That was all they could say when my wife and daughter were gone forever. I told myself they were busy, that they'd come. But a bad feeling clung to me like a shadow I couldn't shake. The days that followed were a blur. I arranged everything in a haze, choosing caskets, ordering flowers, writing eulogies, though each word I wrote felt like a knife in my heart. Friends came to help. Colleagues took turns offering comfort. Ralph and Lillian barely left my side, but their grief only made me feel more alone. I kept looking at the door, waiting for my parents, Norman and Ashley Collins, the people I hoped would share this pain with me. But they didn't show up. Not a message, not a call. Just silence, cold and cruel. The day of the funeral arrived, and the atmosphere in the funeral home was heavy, pressing down on my chest. The scent of chrysanthemums and the soft piano music filled the air, but they couldn't soothe the screaming pain in my heart. I stood at the entrance, wearing the black suit Kayla had once picked out for me, trying to hold myself together. Friends, colleagues, and neighbors from Tulsa came in droves. They quietly shook my hand, whispering words of condolence. Some hugged me, tears streaming down their faces. I nodded, thanked them, but my eyes kept darting to the doorway, hoping and waiting for my parents to walk through, even if just to offer a single word of sympathy. Kayla's family, Ralph and Lillian, arrived early. Ralph, with his weathered face and red-rimmed eyes, gripped my hand tightly as if trying to pass some strength to me. Lillian hugged me, sobbing, calling out Kayla and Lori's names. They brought other relatives, Kayla's siblings, aunts, and uncles I'd only met a few times during holidays. They stood there, quietly wiping tears, sharing memories of Kayla and Lori. Lori was so much like Kayla, Lillian said, her voice choked. Both of them were angels. But the seats reserved for my parents and Sean remained empty. I had set aside 3 chairs in the front row right near Kayla and Lori's caskets with small nameplates. Norman Collins, Ashley Collins, Sean Collins. I imagined my mother sitting there, wiping tears, and my father placing a hand on my shoulder like he used to when I was a boy. Sean, though we weren't close, might at least show up, if only out of courtesy. But it was nearly noon, and those chairs remained cold and empty without a single soul. The funeral grew heavier by the minute. Whispers started to ripple through Kayla's family. I heard them, though I wished I hadn't. Where are his parents? Why aren't they here? One of Kayla's aunts muttered, her voice thick with indignation. Their daughter-in-law and granddaughter are gone and they don't even show up? What kind of people are they? Another voice, likely Kayla's cousin, spoke louder, not bothering to hide his anger. What kind of family leaves Herman alone like this? It's disgraceful. Their words stabbed my heart like knives. I wanted to scream, to explain that I didn't understand why my parents were doing this either. But I just stood there, head bowed, shame and humiliation mixing with the grief of losing my wife and daughter like a wave drowning me. I stepped up to the caskets to say a few words of farewell. I had written a eulogy, but standing there, looking at Kayla and Lori's peaceful faces, I couldn't utter a single word. The crowd waited in silence. I took a deep breath, but my throat closed up, managing only a hoarse whisper. Kayla, Lori. I stopped, tears spilling over, unstoppable. Ralph stepped forward, placed a hand on my back, and whispered, "Leave it, Herman. You've done enough." I nodded, retreating to the seats below, feeling like I'd failed yet again. Failed to give my wife and daughter a proper goodbye. Just when I thought I'd collapsed completely, a firm hand rested on my shoulder. I turned, stunned, to see Uncle Ernest, my father's younger brother, whom I'd only met a few times as a child. He had settled in Canada over a decade ago, and we'd barely kept in touch. Before I could process how he knew about the funeral or why he was there, he wrapped me in a hug so tight I felt the warmth of his body, like an anchor in the storm tearing through me. I didn't say anything, just buried my face in his shoulder, tears streaming down. For the first time that day, I felt I wasn't entirely alone. Uncle Ernest stayed by my side throughout the service, never leaving me. He helped me shake hands with guests, accept flowers, and even spoke a few words on my behalf when I couldn't. His presence was a rare ray of light in the overwhelming darkness. When the service ended, I stood by Kayla and Lori's graves watching the last guests leave. Uncle Ernest stayed, standing quietly beside me. "You don't deserve this, Herman," he said, his voice laced with anger and compassion. "I don't know what my brother was thinking not showing up, but I'm here and I won't let you go through this alone." I nodded, unable to speak, but a tiny seed of hope began to take root in my heart. Later, Uncle Ernest slowly explained why he was there. He said he'd only planned to visit the States for a few days to see old friends. The night before, while sitting in a cafe, he stumbled across my desperate social media post, a few short sentences heavy with pain. He read it over and over, his heart breaking. "I didn't know what else to do but come here," he said, his eyes meeting mine, deep and warm. "I thought you needed at least one family member by your side. Even after all these years apart, I'm still your uncle." I was speechless. In that moment, his presence was like a fragile thread pulling me back from the abyss. I was no longer completely alone. Even so, that moment couldn't erase the pain tearing me apart. When I was alone by the graves, watching the flowers begin to wilt, I thought of Kayla, of Lori, and of those empty chairs in the funeral home. My parents had chosen not to come, chosen to abandon me on the most painful day of my life. And I knew, deep down, that their absence wasn't just a missed moment. It was a declaration. I wasn't important enough for them to care. Standing by my wife and daughter's graves, I felt a new wound open, the wound of betrayal from my own family. I returned to the empty house, once filled with Kayla and Lori's laughter. Now only silence enveloped it, as if the house itself was grieving with me. I sank into the old armchair where I used to sit, listening to Lori talk about her school day, but now it only conjured unfillable voids. I picked up my phone, scrolling through condolence messages from friends, colleagues, and Ralph and Lillian. Then a notification lit up the screen. I opened it. It was a photo. My father, mother, and Sean, my younger brother, stood by a luxurious pool, sunlight glinting off the turquoise water. They were beaming, my father raising a glass of champagne, my mother leaning her head on Sean's shoulder, and Sean flashing a victory sign. The caption posted by my mother read, "A wonderful moment with our real family." Real family. I read those words over and over as if my brain couldn't process them. Real family? Then what was I? What were Kayla and Lori, who had just been laid to rest in cold coffins, to them? My hands trembled as I held the phone. I wanted to throw it, to scream, but I just sat there, numb, feeling my heart tear open again. The image of my parents smiling brightly by the pool while I stood by Kayla and Lori's graves was a betrayal I could never have imagined. I had held onto a sliver of hope that their absence was due to some reason. Work, health, anything. But no, they chose joy, chose Sean, chose champagne and Hawaiian sunshine over standing by me on the most painful day of my life. I called my mother immediately. The phone rang for a long time, and when she answered, her voice was flat, as if she were speaking to a stranger. "Mom, Dad, how could you?" I asked, my voice breaking, struggling to stay calm. "Kayla and Lori's funeral. No one came. And now I see this photo. You, Dad, and Sean are in Hawaii, while I just buried my wife and daughter." I heard my mother sigh, as if I were inconveniencing her. "Herman, don't make a big deal out of this," she said coldly. "This trip was important for Sean. He needed us. The funeral, being there wouldn't have changed anything. They're gone, Herman. You need to understand." I was stunned. "Understand?" I repeated, my voice trembling with anger and pain. "You're telling me to understand?" Kayla was my wife. Lori was my daughter. Your daughter-in-law and granddaughter. How could you say that? My father cut in, his voice gruff. "Don't raise your voice at your mother. This trip was planned long ago, non-cancelable. Sean needed a chance to relax, to grow. Don't you see your brother matters more? I heard Sean's laughter in the background, as if the whole family was having a grand time while I was falling apart. Matters more? I whispered, unable to believe my ears. What about me? Am I not your son? My mother responded, her voice devoid of emotion. Herman, you've always been able to take care of yourself. You don't need us like Sean does. Don't be selfish. I hung up, unable to bear another word. Their words hit like a sledgehammer, crushing the last shred of hope I'd clung to. They didn't just abandon me. They outright declared that I, Kayla, and Lori weren't worth their concern. A flood of memories surged back, pulling me into my childhood in Broken Arrow. I remembered evenings at the dinner table when my mother would boast about Sean's perfect grades while my own A-plus test was brushed aside like it didn't exist. I remembered basketball games at school scoring points only for my father to pat Sean's shoulder and say, "That's my boy." I remembered saving up from my part-time job to buy my mother a birthday gift, only for her to thank me cursorily before showing off the watch Sean gave her, bought with their money. Every achievement, every effort of mine was overlooked, compared, ignored. I learned to stay silent, to swallow the pain, telling myself that if I tried harder, if I was better, my parents would see me the way they saw Sean. I remembered being sick at 15, burning with fever, bedridden. My parents still took Sean to a basketball tournament in another state, leaving me home alone with a curt, "Take your medicine, you'll be fine." I lay there, delirious, wondering if I'd die without anyone knowing. I remembered Christmas mornings when Sean got a new bike while I received an old shirt my mother forgot to wrap. I remembered my high school graduation, standing alone among crowds of parents because mine were busy taking Sean to a talent competition. Those memories which I thought had faded now roared back, sharp and more painful than ever. They piled up, confirming a truth I'd always tried to deny. In my parents' eyes, I wasn't a son, wasn't family, just a faint shadow, an expendable presence in their lives. But just 2 weeks after the funeral, while the wound in my heart was still bleeding, my parents and Sean reappeared with a new blow, even crueler than the poolside photo. They arrived one afternoon while I was sitting in the living room staring at Kayla and Lori's belongings, which I hadn't yet dared to put away. The doorbell rang, pulling me out of my chaotic thoughts. I opened the door, stunned to see my parents and Sean standing there. My father, Norman, in his faded shirt, looked at me with cold eyes. My mother, Ashley, gave a faint smile as if she were only there out of obligation. And Sean, in a pristine suit with a smug grin, stood with his arms crossed as if he owned the place. I had hoped even just a little that they had come to apologize, to offer comfort, to say something about Kayla and Lori. But I was wrong. "Herman, we need to talk," my father said, his voice curt and devoid of emotion. I nodded, though a sense of unease welled up inside me. They walked in and sat on the sofa, the same one where Kayla used to sit and knit, while I remained standing, unwilling to blend into the atmosphere I knew would be far from pleasant. "What's this about?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. My mother got straight to the point without a single word about the funeral or my grief. "Sean has a new business plan. He wants to open a restaurant in downtown Tulsa. It'll take $40,000 to get started. We're family, so I think you should contribute." She spoke as if it were obvious, as if I should just nod and pull out my wallet. I froze, unable to believe my ears. $40,000, when I had just lost my wife and daughter, just held their funeral, and was facing an empty house every day. What were they talking about? "I just lost Kayla and Lori," I said, my voice trembling with restraint. "I don't have the headspace to think about this. And I'm not responsible for Sean's plans." I looked straight into my mother's eyes, hoping she'd understand, that she'd see I was falling apart. But she only frowned, as if I'd said something absurd. "Herman, don't be so selfish," she replied, her tone icy. "You're his older brother, you're supposed to help him. Sean has potential and he needs this opportunity. You've been managing on your own for years, haven't you? Now that you don't have a wife and child anymore, you should focus on your real family. If you don't help, don't blame us for treating you like a stranger." Her words cut like a knife, sharp and cruel. Now that you don't have a wife and child anymore? They treated my grief as if it were a liberation, as if Kayla and Lori were burdens I'd just shed. My father chimed in, his voice low but heavy with pressure. "Who do you think you are to say no? Sean is the future of this family. You're just a truck driver, Herman. Don't act high and mighty." I felt the blood rush to my head, but before I could respond, Sean spoke up, his tone condescending as if he were doing me a favor. "Brother, helping me is a blessing for you. You're a failure, slaving away your whole life and getting nowhere. I'm different, I have vision. You should feel lucky to be part of my plan." I was stunned. Their words, Sean's, my parents, hit me like hammer blows to the chest. They didn't just belittle me or ignore my pain of losing my wife and daughter. They saw me as a tool, a source of money to fuel Sean's ambitions. Sean, who hadn't checked on me once in all these years, who never visited Lori or wished Kayla a happy birthday, now stood here demanding I fulfill some duty. Rage surged within me, but I held it back, speaking slowly, each word carved into the air. "I've taken care of myself all these years. I built a family, raised Lori, loved Kayla without any help from you or Sean. Now I've lost everything, and you come here not to comfort me but to demand money? I'm not responsible for carrying Sean's life. I don't owe anyone anything." My voice shook, not from fear but from the burning anger in my chest. My father shot up, pointing at my face. "You dare talk to your parents like that? You're ungrateful, Herman. If you don't help Sean, you're no son of mine." My mother nodded, her eyes cold. "Exactly. You want to be an outsider? Go ahead, but don't regret it." Sean smirked, adding, "Brother, you think you're so strong? Without family, you're nothing." "Get out of my house," I said, my voice calm but razor sharp. "I don't want to see any of you again. Leave me alone." My father glared at me. My mother sighed as if I were a profound disappointment. Sean shrugged, saying, "Suit yourself, but you'll regret it." They left, leaving me in the silent house, but this time the silence didn't weigh as heavily. Instead, I felt an awakening. I realized they didn't just disrespect me. They were willing to exploit my pain for Sean's benefit. They didn't see me as a son, only as a tool, a disposable figure forced to sacrifice for my brother's future. I sat down, looking at the photo of Kayla and Lori on the table. "I'm sorry," I whispered, as if they could hear me. "I let them humiliate us." But deep down, I knew one thing. I wouldn't let them trample on me anymore. The anger and pain from the confrontation with my parents and Sean still burned, but I didn't know where to begin. Lost in my thoughts, I suddenly remembered something and hurriedly rummaged through my jacket pocket, pulling out the small piece of paper Uncle Ernest had given me at the funeral. He had written his phone number along with a short note. "Call me whenever you need." I clutched the paper, my fingers trembling. Uncle Ernest was the only one in the family who showed up when I needed him most. I wasn't sure what he could do, but I needed someone to listen, someone who didn't see me as a spare part. I took a deep breath and dialed. The phone rang a few times before Uncle Ernest's warm, steady voice came through. "Herman, you okay?" It was a simple question, but it made my throat tighten. No one since the day Kayla and Lori passed had asked me that with such sincerity. I poured everything out, from start to finish, about the humiliation at the funeral, the photo by the pool, and the recent confrontation with my parents and Sean. I told him how they demanded $40,000, about their cruel words, about how they treated me like a tool. I couldn't stay calm. My voice broke, a mix of anger and pain. "Uncle, I don't understand," I said, tears streaming down my face. "Why do they treat me like this? What did I do wrong to be treated like a stranger?" Uncle Ernest was silent for a moment, but I could hear his heavy breathing over the phone. When he spoke, his voice trembled with anger. "Herman, listen to me. You didn't do anything wrong. My brother..." Your father and his wife are wrong. They're shameless, selfish, and they don't deserve a son like you. You don't deserve to be treated like this, never." His words were like a cool breeze, soothing my parched soul. For the first time, someone in the family told me I wasn't wrong, that I deserved to be loved, to be respected. "I'll help you," he continued, his voice firm. "Not for revenge, but so you can reclaim justice for yourself. You're a good man, Herman. I see that, and I won't let you go through this alone." I didn't know how to respond. Tears fell, not from pain, but from a strange feeling, as if for the first time in my life I was being seen as a person, not someone's shadow. "Thank you, Uncle," I whispered, my voice choked. "I don't know what to do next, but I don't want to live like this anymore." Uncle Ernest replied, his tone gentle but resolute. "You don't need to have all the answers right now. I'll be here, step by step. You just need to believe in yourself." From then on, Uncle Ernest became my anchor, even from faraway Canada. He called me every week, not just to check in, but to share ideas and opportunities. He had worked in logistics before moving into real estate, and with his experience, he began guiding me. "Herman, you've been a truck driver for years. You know the transport industry better than anyone," he said. "Why not try something bigger? A small trucking company, maybe. I have some friends in Tulsa who need interstate freight services. Let me connect you." At first, I hesitated. I was just a driver. How could I even think about starting a business? But Uncle Ernest didn't give up. He introduced me to an old friend of his, Carl, who owned a produce distribution company in Oklahoma. "Carl needs reliable people to haul his goods," he said. "You're the most reliable person I know." His simple praise made me feel valued. Uncle Ernest didn't just help with work. More importantly, he was the first in the family to truly see me. During one call, he shared stories of his younger days when he too felt belittled by my father, his brother. "But I learned to live for myself," he said. "You can do it too, Herman. You're stronger than you think." His words were like a small flame, igniting a belief in me that I wasn't the disposable shadow my parents made me out to be. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel alone. Uncle Ernest wasn't just family, he was a mentor, a friend. His support was a turning point, pulling me out of the abyss of despair. I began to envision a future where I didn't just survive, but thrived. Each new contract, each word of praise from a client became a brick in the foundation of my self-belief. I knew the journey wouldn't be easy, but with Uncle Ernest by my side, I felt I could face anything. In the early days, I was still just a truck driver, hauling my old Peterbilt through the dusty roads of Oklahoma. But Uncle Ernest's words kept echoing in my mind. "You know the transport industry better than anyone. Think bigger." I started spending long nights in my empty house reading the articles Uncle sent me. Guides on financial management and how to build a small business. I'd never thought I was smart enough for such things. My parents always said I was only good for manual labor. But Uncle Ernest believed I could do it, and that made me want to try. I started with small steps. Through Uncle's introduction, I met Carl, an older man with silver hair and a kind smile who owned a produce distribution company in Tulsa. "Ernest says you're reliable," Carl said, peering at me through his old glasses. "I need someone to haul goods from farms to the warehouse. Can you handle it?" I nodded, though I wasn't sure I could meet his expectations. But I didn't want to let Uncle down. I signed my first contract with Carl, transporting loads of potatoes and corn from rural farms to Tulsa. The work wasn't much different from what I'd done before, but this time, I wasn't just a driver. I was directly responsible to the client. Those first deliveries weren't easy. I fumbled with negotiating prices, issuing invoices, and handling issues like flat tires or bad weather. Once a shipment was delayed because I miscalculated the route, and I thought Carl would drop me. But he just laughed and patted my shoulder. "You're new at this, Herman. Everyone has a first time. Learn from your mistakes." His encouragement, along with Uncle Ernest's weekly calls, kept me from giving up. Uncle taught me how to plan efficient routes, negotiate to maintain profits, and most importantly, how to believe in myself. You don't have to be great from the start, he said, but you have to start to become great. I gradually built a reputation. After Carl, I landed contracts with an organic grocery store in downtown Tulsa, then a poultry farm on the outskirts. I worked tirelessly, often driving from early morning until midnight. But I didn't complain. Every delivery, every satisfied nod from a client reminded me I was moving forward. I didn't splurge, though the loneliness sometimes tempted me to drown my sorrows at a bar. Instead, I saved every penny, reinvesting in truck maintenance, buying new equipment, and learning new skills. Uncle Ernest wasn't just a mentor from afar. He was a bridge to bigger opportunities. He introduced me to an old business partner, Helen, who ran a small logistics company in Oklahoma City. "You could work with me on intrastate hauls," Helen said at our first meeting. "But I need someone reliable, not just a driver, but someone who keeps their word." I looked her in the eye and said, "I won't let you down." And I kept my promise. The contract with Helen opened a new door. I wasn't just hauling produce anymore, but also medical equipment and consumer goods. The work was more demanding, the pressure higher, but I felt alive, truly alive, for the first time since losing Kayla and Lori. After 2 years, I'd saved enough to buy a second used but reliable truck and hire another driver to share the workload. I named the company Collins Transport, a reminder that I, Herman Collins, could build something to be proud of. I rented a small office on the outskirts of Tulsa, just big enough for a desk and an old laptop. Every time I signed a new contract, I texted Uncle Ernest, and he always replied with a short but powerful message. "You're doing great, Herman. Keep going." By the 3rd year, Collins Transport had 3 trucks and a small team of 5, including me. We weren't big, but we were steady. Farms, stores, and companies in Tulsa started to know my name. They called me Reliable Herman. And every time I heard it, I felt a pride my parents never gave me. I was no longer the bottom feeder they'd labeled me, no longer the quiet older brother who only drove trucks. I was Herman Collins, a man who rose from the ashes, turning pain into strength. Most importantly, I regained my confidence and self-respect. Every morning, looking in the mirror, I no longer saw a failure or a shadow of my brother. I saw a man who deserved respect, not because of my parents' approval, but because of what I'd achieved. Uncle Ernest still called every week, not just to talk business, but to remind me I wasn't alone. "You're my pride," he said during one call, and I had to turn away to hide my tears. It was the first time in my life someone in my family called me their pride. I still visited Kayla and Lori's graves every week, bringing white daisies, Kayla's favorite. "I'm making it, sweetheart," I whispered, placing the flowers by their headstones. "I'm living for you and Lori." The house was still empty, the pain still lingered, but I no longer let it drown me. I had learned to stand tall, to hold my head high, and to believe I deserved a better life. With Uncle Ernest by my side and the bricks I'd laid with my own hands, I knew I was on the right path, a path I and I alone defined. While I was rebuilding my life step by step, my immediate family, my parents and Sean, spiraled into a mess of their own making. I heard through the grapevine in Broken Arrow that Sean, my parents' pride and joy, had spectacularly failed in the restaurant venture they once pressured me to fund. It turned out that Sean's so-called vision was nothing but lavish parties, extravagant trips, and impulsive decisions without a shred of planning. His restaurant didn't even last a year before shutting down, leaving behind a mountain of debt he couldn't pay. Bank loans, unpaid bills, and empty promises to investors piled up, turning Sean from a promising young entrepreneur into a despised bankrupt. My parents, Norman and Ashley, fared no better. In Broken Arrow, where everyone knew each other, their absence at the funeral couldn't stay hidden for long. At first, it was just whispers behind their backs, but soon the whole town was talking. Neighbors avoided their gazes, old friends grew distant. People who once sat with them at fancy club dinners now gave only curt nods before turning away to gossip. How could they abandon their own son? One neighbor said coldly. Their daughter-in-law and granddaughter died and they were sunbathing in Hawaii? Utterly heartless. Those words like invisible knives sliced through the facade of pride my parents had worn for so long. The glow of boasting about Sean no longer hid the truth. They lost invitations to dinners, their place in conversations. From being the center of attention, my parents became forgotten outcasts, shunned by the community in cold silence. Debt and isolation engulfed them. Sean, with no way to manage, lived off my parents' savings, but that money quickly ran dry. They sold their new car, cut back on lavish vacations, but it still wasn't enough to cover the growing debts. I didn't seek out the news, but it reached me through acquaintances, through overheard conversations at the coffee shop. I didn't take pleasure in their downfall. After all, they were still my parents and brother. But I also no longer felt responsible for saving them. I had given them too many chances, and they had chosen to cast me out of their lives. Then one day, more than 3 years after Kayla and Lori's funeral, they came to me. I was in the small office of Collins Transport reviewing delivery schedules when a knock came at the door. I opened it to find my father, mother, and Sean standing there. My father, now looking much older, his hair streaked with gray, his eyes no longer cold but weary. My mother, once always impeccably dressed, wore an old sweater, her eyes lifeless. Sean, who once strutted in a sleek suit, stood in rumpled clothes, his smug smile gone. I wasn't surprised, but my heart still tightened. "Herman, we need to talk," my father said, his voice low but still carrying a hint of authority, as if he still controlled everything. I let them in, not because I wanted to, but because I knew this meeting was inevitable. They sat down, and my mother got straight to the point, her voice dry. "Sean's in trouble. He needs money to pay off debts and start over. You've got a company now, a name in Tulsa. As his older brother, you have to help him get back on his feet." I looked at my mother, then my father, and finally Sean. None of them apologized, none acknowledged the wounds they'd inflicted. They came here not with remorse, but with arrogance, as if I owed them a favor. "Help Sean?" I repeated, my voice calm but sharp. 3 years ago, when I lost Kayla and Lori, not one of you showed up. Not one of you asked if I was okay. Now you come here, not to apologize, but to demand I bail Sean out? On what grounds? My father frowned, his voice harsh. "What are you talking about, Herman? Who do you think you are, just because of this little company? Sean's your brother, your flesh and blood. You've had some success, so you're supposed to share it with family, not sit there acting superior." My mother cut in, her tone full of reproach. "Have you forgotten who raised you? Sean needs you, and you're obligated to help. Don't make us ashamed of an ungrateful son like you." Sean, speaking for the first time, used a tone half pleading, half demanding. "Brother, you know I'm struggling. Just help me this once and I won't forget it. Don't let the family down." I stood there looking at them, feeling as if I were staring at strangers. Their arrogance, even in their downfall, made me both angry and bitter. They didn't come to apologize or beg. They came to command, to force me to bear the consequences of their own mistakes. I took a deep breath and looked straight into my father's eyes. I stood up on my own, without any of you. I built Collins Transport from nothing while you called me a failure. I don't owe Sean, and I don't owe you. If you came here to give orders, there's the door. My father shot up, pointing at my face. "You'll regret this, Herman. You dare turn your back on family?" My mother added, her voice trembling but still sharp. "If you don't help, don't blame us for disowning you." Sean just smirked, as if I were a fool for not seizing the opportunity to do him a favor. I pointed to the door, my voice calm but firm. "Get out. I'm done listening." They left, leaving me in my small office, but this time I didn't feel alone. I felt strong, as if I'd just cut the chains that had bound me for years. The conflict between us had reached its peak, but I was no longer afraid. I was no longer the bottom feeder they'd labeled me. I was Herman Collins, a man who stood tall, who built a new life from ashes. And I knew even if they disowned me, I would keep moving forward, for Kayla, for Lori, and for myself. But my parents, Norman and Ashley, along with Sean, didn't stop there. After the confrontation at my office, I heard through the grapevine that they began spreading lies about me within the family. They told aunts, uncles, and cousins that I was an ungrateful son, that I turned my back on the family, abandoning my parents when they needed me most. They claimed I, just a useless truck driver, had stumbled into some success by leeching off others and was now too arrogant to help Sean, their so-called pride of the family. Those words, like poisoned arrows, spread quickly during small family gatherings, over phone calls, and through gossip in Broken Arrow. I knew because a few distant relatives messaged me, their tone laced with doubt. "Herman, is it true you didn't help your parents? They say you've changed." Each message stung like a cut, but I didn't respond or defend myself. I was too tired of trying to prove myself to people who never wanted to see me. I knew arguing or explaining would only drag me into their swamp of lies, crushing me once more. Instead, I chose silence, waiting for an opportunity, a moment when the truth would speak for itself. That opportunity came at a family reunion held that fall at a community center in Broken Arrow. It was a big event, where the entire Collins clan gathered, aunts, uncles, cousins I'd only met a few times, and even distant relatives. I received an invitation not from my parents, but from Aunt Martha, an elderly aunt who always played the role of family connector. "Herman, you have to come," she messaged. "Everyone wants to meet you and hear about what you've accomplished." I hesitated, knowing my parents and Sean would be there, but I agreed. Not to boast, but because I wanted to face them in a space where the truth couldn't be distorted. I prepared thoroughly. In the weeks leading up to the reunion, I gathered everything I needed, documents proving my journey from my first contract with Carl to invoices, receipts, and thank you letters from Collins Transport's clients. I also kept evidence of Sean's failure, a local newspaper article about his restaurant's bankruptcy, messages from acquaintances detailing his debts, and rumors of his reckless spending. But most importantly, I held on to the photo my mother posted on Facebook the day of Kayla and Lori's funeral, the one of them smiling brightly by a pool in Hawaii, captioned coldly, "Wonderful moment with the real family." I printed it out, carefully tucked it into a folder like a final bullet. The day of the reunion arrived, the hall filled with laughter and warm embraces. I walked in, wearing a simple but neat dress shirt, no longer the sullen Herman of years past. A few relatives greeted me, their eyes curious. "Heard you've got a trucking company, Herman?" Uncle Paul, a distant uncle, asked. I smiled and nodded. "I'm trying, Uncle." But I felt other gazes, skeptical ones from those who'd heard my parents' story. There they were, my parents and Sean, in a corner of the hall chatting with a few relatives, their voices brimming with confidence. They still carried their air of arrogance, as if they controlled the narrative, still the center of the family. I chose a quiet corner, waiting for my moment. The reunion began with speeches about family tradition and unity. Aunt Martha stood up, inviting everyone to share about their lives. When my turn came, I stood holding my folder, my heart pounding but my voice steady. "I'm not good with speeches." I began looking around the hall. But today I want to share my story, not to brag, but to set some things straight. I recounted my journey from the day I lost Kayla and Lori to how I built Collins Transport from nothing. I presented contracts, receipts, and client thank you letters, showing that I hadn't lucked out or leeched, as my parents claimed. I worked day and night, I said, my voice low but firm. Not to prove anything to anyone, but to keep living for my wife and daughter. The hall was silent save for faint murmurs as I displayed each document. My father frowned, my mother looked down, and Sean fidgeted, his eyes betraying discomfort. Then I reached the crucial part. 3 years ago, when I buried my wife and daughter, I waited for my family, my parents and brother, to share my grief. They didn't come. I paused, pulling out the printed Facebook photo and holding it up for all to see. This is where they were that day. In Hawaii by a pool raising champagne glasses captioned, "The Real Family," while I stood by Kayla and Lori's graves. The hall erupted in murmurs, shocked and angry eyes turning toward my parents and Sean. Some shook their heads, others whispered, "How could they do that?" My father stood, his face flushed, hands clenched and trembling, his voice cracked with anger. "You dare humiliate your parents in front of the family? You're ungrateful." My mother jumped in, her voice high-pitched and panicked. "We were busy, Herman. Who are you to judge? You're just a lowly truck driver. What's there to be proud of?" Sean couldn't stay silent either, glaring at me with venom. "Brother, you think you're something special. It's all just luck. Nothing to be smug about." But their protests echoed into a thick silence. The family's eyes, filled with doubt, contempt, and disappointment, locked onto them. The more they shouted, the shakier their voices became, lost in the face of the exposed truth. Their words sounded like desperate defenses from people who'd lost all authority. At that moment, the hall's door opened and Uncle Ernest walked in. Fresh from Canada, he stood there with a calm but commanding presence. "Sorry I'm late," he said, his voice cutting through the tense air. "But I'm here to confirm that everything Herman said is true. I've seen my brother and sister-in-law Norman and Ashley belittle Herman since he was a child. They always favored Sean, ignoring Herman's efforts. And on the day of Kayla and Lori's funeral, I was the only family member there while they chose to vacation." He paused, looking straight at my parents. "Herman isn't ungrateful. You're the ones who abandoned your son." Uncle Ernest's presence, like a living witness, made my accusations undeniable. The hall fell silent. Then murmurs rose again, this time not with doubt but with outrage. Aunt Martha shook her head, saying loudly, "Norman, Ashley, how could you do that to your son?" Another Uncle Paul stood. "Herman pulled himself up, but what about you? All you do is blame and lie." My parents tried to argue back, my mother nearly shouting, "We did nothing wrong. Herman's the one who turned his back." But no one believed them anymore. The evidence was clear, the photo, the documents, and Uncle Ernest's testimony. My parents and Sean stood frozen under the weight of disdainful, disappointed stares. My mother trembled, head bowed, her hands covering tears of shame and fear. My father, stiff and awkward, found no words to defend himself, only grabbing Sean's arm and pulling him away. Sean resisted briefly, but the family's gazes forced his head down. They walked out quietly, their hunched backs pitifully small in the hall's harsh light. No one stopped them, no one spoke. The room fell into a heavy silence, thick with undeniable truth. I stood there watching their retreating figures, but I didn't feel triumphant. I felt relieved, as if a burden had been lifted. I turned to the family, my voice calm but resolute. Today's truth wasn't to humiliate anyone, but to end the lies. From now on, I'll live my life, no longer trampled on by my own family. The hall was quiet, then Aunt Martha walked over and hugged me. "You're the pride of this family, Herman," she said, and for the first time I felt I truly belonged to a family, not my parents, but one that valued me. After the family reunion, I knew I could no longer hold on to any ties with my parents and Sean. Their lies, their contempt, and the way they exploited me had destroyed any hope of a real family relationship. I didn't call, didn't text, didn't reach out. When Uncle Paul, a cousin, asked if I wanted to reconcile, I just shook my head. "They chose their path," I said, my voice low but firm. "I've chosen mine." I cut off all contact, not out of hatred, but because I understood that to keep living I had to let go of those who only dragged me down. My parents and Sean were no longer my family. They were my past, and I didn't want to carry that past into my future. One afternoon, I returned to the cemetery where Kayla and Lori rested. I brought a bouquet of white daisies, placing them gently by their graves. The wind blew, carrying the crisp chill of an Oklahoma fall. I knelt, touching the headstone engraved with their names, and whispered, "I've reclaimed our honor, sweetheart. No one can dishonor you and Lori anymore." Tears fell, but this time they weren't heavy. They were tears of release of a man who had found himself again. I sat there telling Kayla and Lori about Colin's transport, the deliveries, the new clients, and how I stood before the family to speak the truth. "I'm living," I said, my voice choked. "For you, for Lori, and for me." The pain of losing Kayla and Lori never faded. Some nights when the house was too quiet, I still heard Lori's laughter echoing, saw Kayla's smile in my dreams. But I had learned to turn that pain into strength. Every new contract, every additional truck in the fleet, every compliment from a client was a reminder that I wasn't just surviving. I was living a meaningful life. I no longer sought validation from those who never offered it. Instead, I found my worth in my work, my perseverance, and the people who truly valued me. While I rose, my parents and Sean continued their downward spiral in the storm they'd created. News from Broken Arrow reached me that Sean, after his earlier failure, tried starting another business but crashed again due to his reckless spending and irresponsibility. Creditors lost patience, hounding him for every cent, forcing him to flee town for a while. My parents, once proud of their reputation, now lived under the community's contempt. Neighbors who once visited to hear them brag about Sean now avoided them, whispering about their callousness during Kayla and Lori's funeral. They sold their house in Broken Arrow, moving to a smaller apartment, but the debts clung to them like an unshakable shadow. I didn't contact them or ask after them, but each piece of news brought a twinge of bitterness, not for them, but for the years I wasted waiting for their love. Meanwhile, I found a new family, not of blood, but of people who genuinely cared. Uncle Ernest still called weekly from Canada, sharing advice, telling stories, and reminding me I was his pride. "You're doing better than I ever imagined, Herman," he said, his voice brimming with pride. "But don't stop. You've got a long road ahead." Aunt Martha, Uncle Paul, and other relatives began inviting me to gatherings, no longer seeing me as the quiet older brother, but as a respectable man. Carl and Helen, my first business partners at Colin's Transport, became friends, often inviting me to dinner and sharing stories about their families as if I were part of them. Colin's Transport kept growing, though it remained a small company. I bought another truck, hired 2 more drivers, and expanded services to cities near Tulsa. I wasn't rich, but I had enough to look in the mirror each morning and see a free man, unbound by lies or disdain. I started joining community events in Tulsa, helping small farms with discounted transport rates, and even sponsoring a playground for the elementary school where Lori once studied. Everything I did with Kayla and Lori in mind, as if they were watching, smiling. One evening, I sat in my small office looking out the window at Tulsa's twinkling lights. I opened my laptop, reviewed new contracts, then paused at an old photo. Our little family, Kayla holding Lori in a daisy garden. "I did it, sweetheart," I whispered, my fingers brushing the screen. "I've found a life worth living." The pain was still there, a scar reminding me of the darkness I'd overcome to step into the light. I knew my parents and Sean would never understand, never change. They would live with what they chose, debts, contempt, and a shattered reputation. But I didn't need them anymore. I had Uncle Ernest, Aunt Martha, my friends and partners in Tulsa, and most importantly, I had myself, Herman Collins, a man who learned to stand up, to love himself, and to live for what truly mattered. I closed my eyes, smiled, and for the first time in years I felt at peace.